community, the theory of the four elements of skills of Miletus, Epicurean materialism, Cyto-idealism, Judaism, Islam, and modern science are rooted in Egyptian cosmology and science. He therefore argued that by renewing ties with Egypt, we soon discover an historical perspective of 5,000 years that made possible the diachronic study on our own land of all scientific disciplines we are trying to integrate to modern African thought. And when I come now, I will try and explain it. For Diop, to become conscious of that historical fact is perhaps the first step towards a genuine retrieval of himself. Because without it, intellectual sterility is the general rule, or else the creation there are no what imprint of subhuman. Diop can be polemic. You can see it from the very beginning. Thus, Cheik Anta Diops was an African philosophy exists, for the insistence of the connection of African intellectual tradition, cosmogonies, and ancient Egyptian thought. Diop's work, according to Abiola Irele, demonstrates the continuity of ancient Egyptian civilization in its traditional culture of contemporary Africa. Diop demonstrated that Africans as the interior of the continent, like the Greeks, were initiated to different degrees of Egyptian philosophy, which explains the numerous similarities and connection and continuity between these cosmogonies, which he argued could not stem from chance, but which re-established clarity and rationality. As pointed out by Mudimbe, Diop's work constituted part of the most prudent undertaking in 1940 re-evaluation of the history of the continent. It was concerned with connecting the history of the rest of Africa to ancient Egypt rather than preoccupation with Egypt's influence on Greece. And this is important too. Why Martin Bernard and the whole debate have been Egypt and Greece. Diop went backward, and this is what Milevkovic said we should do. What is the connection of ancient Egypt to African cosmogony and culture? So we're coming back, because before it's like, what Egypt influenced Greece. No. What is the relation between Egypt and the rest of the continent? That is what Diop main focus. And he tried to trace it through the study of languages, the study of artifacts. And that's why as soon as you understand this, it's like you have a new consciousness. Imagine, people think South Africa is very far to Egypt. But you can geographically, and all of us can know that, you can study geography. Where is lion in Egypt? Where do you think, where can lion? Lion is not natural, it's not by nature in Egypt. Gold, where are the gold mines? Where are the gold mines up north? The gold comes from here. If you study your geography, you can just look at down here, the monsoon that go from Mozambique up north. You just have to know the time to sail. The wind blows you down here and takes you back here, just from on this Indian Ocean. So you can see that things like Great Zimbabwe, everything is known to the Egyptians, because they will tell you about pygmies that come down up north. And we've never known where ponds or all those places are now till today. Certainly, and then I'll quickly jump here. Interestingly, I'm jumping now. Interestingly, this is what Diop said, our young philosophers. But interestingly, Diop's perspective of African philosophy was categorized by Samuel Mbo as ethno-philosophy because of its insistence on the existence of a fundamental cultural unity among the different African cosmogonies. By tracing their historical and conceptual connection to ancient philosophy, Diop provides what Abiola really calls a scholarly erudition to ethno-philosophy and offers a deeper understanding of its concept, which rehabilitated the ethno-philosophy of Father Temples and Alex Kagame. He nonetheless criticized them for projecting a thought that fails the most basic criteria for any system of thought to be considered philosophy, that it must be conscious of itself and of its own existence as thought. Remember, the Bantu philosophy of Father Temple. The other doesn't know. We say it's not that this philosophy I'm telling you, it is not admit any Bantu. It doesn't know. Only through Father Temple as what you call the patronizing father, he's able to, this is what you think, then he's able to systematize it. That is one thing. Diop argued that a system of thought of which the opponent is early aware cannot be considered philosophy, as he stated. Certainly during the colonial epoch, when they were intensely lived, I don't think I have to quote the result there. They were close to self-conscious support. They have since become degraded, fossilized, and it will be excessive to take them for philosophical system at this point in time. I will come back to why African cosmogony were degraded, because at the same time, the Greeks were being inducted into Egyptian philosophy. Africans were at the same time being inducted into it, but our own system of knowledge production is faulty. It is by selective initiation. You get what I mean? So the more you select, it's not like broad, but you have to. That's why most Egyptian philosophers are priests. So it is the religious, concept of it. And this is the main distinction. This is the only thing Greek acts with Egyptian philosophy, as I will call it, is the atheistic materialism. They remove God away from all these concepts and actually deal with it according to matter. Meanwhile, in Egyptian, it's always, that's the way of his God. Spiritual components was never lost. That is the difference. Diops described the philosophy debate as a bogus debate because of the lack of attention to its historicity. He said that it is essential to break away from a temporal structural study of African cosmogony, because by isolating oneself from historical framework, one becomes exhausted in the first battle without knowing it. Because what are you going to argue? You argue based on what? Just analytics. There is no historical content to it. Things don't, and this is the main difference. What Diops adds to African philosophy and study is the importance of history. This is what Marx added to the whole. This is the most important thing in Marx philosophy: history. Like in Diops, history is very important to Diops. And then he went on like so. According to him, we can only build a body of discipline in humanity by legitimizing and systemizing the turn to Egypt. In the course of this account, we will see that only Egyptian facts allow us to find here and there the common denominator of the remnants of thought, a connection with African cosmogony in the place of fossilization. As soon as we make this connection, ethnophilosophy, this connection of African cosmogony and ancient Egyptian philosophy according to Diops, we will realize that, as stated by Obenga, the revelation of Ugotimeli, which I will call Ugotimeli is Dogon. You have a conversation with Ugotimeli. It's a big work by Master Gray. What Master Gray did was to have a conversation with Ugotimeli is blind. They have never been to school. And he stated that they play not only deep philosophy, but it discussed the style of Cyrus. You understand? And it's only now that we have been able to find out what exactly the style of Cyrus is discussing. It's the same thing you find in modern science. And even it's called the finest and heaviest star. They call it digital equality. And this has been proved by science again. You understand? To this extent, you can see that Master Gray is probably around maybe 1945. I don't know. It was a very old book. Master Gray is a French philosopher who interviewed Ugotimeli, and he has a partner. He wrote a lot of things on it, so you can Google Ugotimeli. And then, as the derivation of Ugotimeli of Bantu philosophy turns out to contribute precious information, which helps us better understand crucial aspects of Egyptian thought and its relationship to African cosmogony and the utilitarian significance of this fact, as demonstrated by Diops in his comparison of the Go philosophy and Bantu philosophy. The concept of vital force and the Bantu philosophy concept of vital force. Only the Egyptian fact allows us to find a common denominator between African cosmogony and the Egyptian fact. Then this is a very, very brief review I'm doing on chapter 7, because the question is, does an African philosophy exist? In this chapter, Diops answered the question of the extent of African philosophy by showing how, through historical and linguistic comparative methods, the origin and development of philosophy in ancient Egypt and its connection and relationship with African cosmogony and Greek philosophy. What Diops basically did was like the three process of comparison. He compared Egyptian philosophy to African cosmogony. And then he went ahead and compared this Egyptian cosmogony to Greek. And he focused on Timaeus and Plato's metaphysics. You understand? And he showed the relationship, because this what we see in this African cosmogony translated into Egypt. We can just find it in Plato and in Aristotle. It makes that connection. So I would advise people to actually look at that. It demonstrates the interconnectedness of contemporary African philosophy to ancient Egyptian philosophy and Greek philosophy, focusing on Plato, Timaeus, and Aristotle physics. Starting with the bit, then I will quickly jump there. But this I think is important. In discussing, because I mentioned Dogon earlier, but it focused on, it started with discussing, because after saying this is Egypt, it said into this black African. Because remember, what Diops was saying is that this ancient Egyptian cosmogony is still active. It's what we just walk past every day. It's Bantu philosophy, it's Ubuntu, and it's like we don't take it like we think it's not knowledge. But a deeper understanding, connecting you to Egypt, will let you see the bigger significance of this concept. But he said this thing in discussing the most important aspects of the Dogon cosmogony, the advanced scientific phase of recognition of the stars of Sirius. Diops made a very important remark concerning key problems of knowledge production and transmission in Africa. According to him, the practice of initiation of a select few to different degrees of knowledge to the exclusion of a wide majority contributed greatly to the degradation and fossilization of crucial knowledge in Africa. Based on the evidence of concurrence based on the evidence of concurrence of Egyptian and the Greek cosmogony, which are barely engaged for lack of faith. But through the symbolism of number is paramount, as in Pythagoras. That's one thing to play with. Even children know it. In African cosmogony, numbers are very important. They say Africans don't count. All this musi you see is based on calculation. You can check it. What is your name? They will tell you what is your. They will tell you how many tooth of snake you have to get, how many high of. So and they calculate it. It's basically people do. When you go to Sangoma, you can see them. They are doing this calculation always. They are not just working. When they put those things, it's actually mathematical, which is not on your. You can't know it unless you are initiated. But so that's the importance of number, as in Pythagoras and African cosmogony. And you can see in my own language, you can see Plato counted up to 27. Look at most Africans, Bambara, all of them. The 27, the sequences of 1, 9, up to 27, is very, very important there. So that is one thing. Turning to and you see in Bantu philosophy, they say, temples say being is force and force is being. And then so this force philosophy, people don't understand why is force important in Bantu philosophy. Diop traced the origin of the concept to Egypt and show its importance as the basis of African monarchical system. Because if you are a king, you are supposed to be able to have a lot of vital force. Because if your vital force is less, then there will be a lot of problem in society. We expect our king as representative of God to have the highest vital force so that he can be benevolent and be able to do a lot of things. So it's the whole concept of vital force and increasing or decreasing vital force is tied to African monarchical system. That's why in Africa, and for every 6 years or 8 years or 60 years, the king is before literally put to death. But after some time, the king also is not only literally put into death, it's now become ritual murder. That's why you find people like masquerade after some just to renew, to say how vital, how strong he is. That a king who is wounded in war is forced to abdicate. You can't be sick. A king can't be sick. You have to move on. So that's why after some time they test the vital force. Then this is very important, which I don't have to. It discussed Alex Kagame is the one who started Kintu, Untu, and stuff like that. And you can see the Untu is there, but there's Kintu, Muntu, and Bantu. And from there you find Ubuntu. It's emphasizing on this, the root of this Untu. That it is like in most African language, one word. It depends on how you pronounce it. Can mean 3 or 4 things. I don't know if it was said about Kintu, and in my language I can have word like that. It's one word, it's spelled one word, but depending on how the gradation, in my intonation, it shows different meaning. Okay. Then one basic fact again, because I think I skipped something. Please, I will have to go back to this because this is very important. According to Diop, the true fundamental criteria for any thought to qualify as philosophy is that it must be conscious of itself, of its own existence as thought. It must have accomplished to a sufficient degree the separation of myth from concept. Both, Diop argue, were met in African and Egyptian cosmogony. But in African cosmogony, this whole thought has become degraded, and we can't call them thought again because of this problem of system of knowledge production and transmission. Now, the next, then I can make a big jump here because Diop discussing in trying to show that the Egyptian philosophy has met the second criteria of separating myth from concept. Diop posed the question that is it possible to teach mathematics or grammar without having if you want to teach mathematics, you need a meta language, something that coded. And if you want to teach mathematics, you need mathematical logic that will embed it in. He said both have been accomplished in Egypt because they taught mathematics and grammar. The next section quickly is it's about religion. I think I will jump. And I've mentioned Diop showed the unacknowledged depth of Greek philosophy to Egyptian philosophy. And this I've discussed this too. It's not philosophy. Then I'll quickly jump here to the implication of Diop thesis. Diop thesis remain influential. According to Pauline Otonji, Diop historiography allows us to put the colonial and late pre-colonial period into perspective, and to probe more deeply into the African past. According to Mamdani, why a debate around Diop in North American academy has revolved around the claim that ancient Egyptian civilization is African. Diop's larger significance lay in the more general question he raised, whether the history before the arrival of the white man could be understood as social history, historical sociology, or whether the limit of our understanding was the limit of archaeology. The task of tracing the history of philosophy as Africa, pioneered by Diop, has generated substantial literature, even among scholars who might be uncomfortable with the extreme view thesis that sometimes been taken. And you can see that in what we call ultra-Afrocentrics. Because the question is, if we say, oh, Egypt built everything, Egypt built the star, he built the moon, he built this, he built that, then what is happening is that we are descendants of the Egyptians, we can't even build a house. That's the question we are. If we build all these things, what is that? What has happened that we can't make a pen? You get what I'm saying? So it's not just saying Africans do all those things, they build pyramids, but we can't even look at where we live. We can't even build houses, we can't kill ourselves. So that's another, just to avoid over glorification, because that's what we call Afrocentric Gloriana. J. Masolo, through this discussion, if you say, I've forgotten, discussion of African philosophy in the Greco-Roman era, is undeniably part of this effort. Eric Olela, the African Foundation of Great Philosophy, and Latinaketa, the African philosophical tradition, both of which are compared to the thesis. Mulasi Ashanti instrumentalized this approach by codifying into a philosophical practice of Afrocentricity, which is defined as an epistemological perspective, a consciousness of thought, mode of analysis, and an actionable perspective from where Africans seek from agents to accept subject based within the context of history. Why the theory continues where they are continuing to discolorize recognition of relevance of a debate generated by Diop's thesis, which have been received as an article of faith by Afrocentrists, and his thesis have been challenged in the Black Antenna debate between Martin Bellan on the one side and Mary Lefkowitz and Goy Roger, who argue that the whole theory Diop is talking about is like being comfortable with the idea that the world is flat. It's just, what is it? It's like how can you say you're saying the world is completely, because it's a paradigmatic change. Diop's work also have not been without criticism, even from among those sympathetic to a subjective of understanding the truth of African past. Diop's work has also not been without criticism, even among those sympathetic to a subjective of understanding the truth of the African past through rigorous study. V.Y. Mudimbe and B. Jewiski acknowledge that Diop's thesis that Egypt was Africa. That Egypt was an African civilization, just at the eve of humanity appeared to be Africa. However, they questioned the validity of his ideological motive and exposed the paradox that Diop is astonishingly faithful to Hegel, which he set out to challenge by his African-Egyptian thesis. They argue was because Diop conceptualized the colonial parenthesis of African history as a period corresponding to a sort of descent into hell and serving only to be forgotten in a similar manner as Hegel. Notwithstanding their criticism, however, they still class Diop among participants of a philosophical perception of the past who believe it was necessary to reconcile the discourse of the past with the poetical philosophy of the present. This is a description which fits perfectly with Diop's objective. However, Mudimbe and Jewiski further show the paradox of seeing Diop's philosophy as African and critical by exposing the ideological assumption that underlines it. This assumption would be argued between the ideological conceptual incarceration of those philosophy in Western British Enlightenment thought. Based on the seeming implicitness of this factor that you say, you can see, and this is one thing again Diop emphasized, which you must not forget. There is no two ways to fly a plane. You can't say there's African methodology of flying a plane and European methodology of flying a plane. Remember I said in the first time, what Diop tries to do is that African philosophy is intrinsic and subversive of Western philosophy. It is the history and its connection to us we're trying to say. We're not saying, because, like you say, if you don't have this, and you say, we don't make more, it's not infinite. There's one science, and this science is very African. So that's what it's not that you go and discover your own science in the corner. We stay on scientific terrain, and I will come to that. So in response to Mudimbe, Diop maintains, and I said, that his thesis were merely a progress report, rough outline of successful steps, prepared as an indication of the direction in which future generation must follow. He cautions that this must be an intellectual effort, which must never descend from the scientific to the emotional level. This is very important because you see, what this thought has been accused, it's emotional, and I mentioned initially Martin Bernard, it's just, it's nationalist agenda. But no, let's stay on strictly scientific ground and we can prove and show the facts. That is one thing. Diop suggested, and this is how Diop suggested the formation of team of interdisciplinary researcher consisting of polyvalent scientific teams in natural and human sciences capable of doing in-depth studies to see the weakness and the unfinished side of his work. As stated by Charles Flinch, Diop's work was as a search of truth and not the establishment of a new orthodoxy, needed proper feedback, examination, and testing necessary to validate them despite their wedding deception. So I will quickly jump now, and because I guess, and then the importance for me, the importance of Diop's work, which inspires further study, is that it has appropriate and relevant questions which few people are ventured to answer. Attempting to find answers to the question raised by Diop, and debate it continues to generate thus offers immense opportunity for innovative research in African philosophy in the context of time for the declaration of knowledge production. And so, and these are mentioned, but the last one I want to know, then giving Diop emphasis on science. Emphasis that, because if you can't read Diop, understand it, if you don't understand seriously Greek philosophy. How should philosophy be taught in Africa? Given Diop thesis, Obenga, and Martin Bernard, can Diop be properly grasped without basis in Western philosophy, despite the pre-Socratic and Greek philosophy? That is a big question, because if you read Diop very well, Diop is, and Mudebe said that it's really, really in bed with Western philosophy. You get what I'm saying? It's from that perspective, and it's silly to be pre-Socratic philosophy, and that's why it's insisting on standing on scientific ground. So how do we now grab this? If you go straight and read Diop, you'll just be reading out of it. But if you have a deeper knowledge of Western philosophy, especially Greek philosophy, you get it, you understand what Diop is trying to do. But what Diop is trying to say is that African philosophy, this is our African cosmogony philosophy, is actually intrinsic, is the basis, if you trace it very well, the basis of Egyptian philosophy, which give back to Greece. So for us, it's like we're doing like a circular connection. This is what we have now, Western science, which we believe is very un-African. Those say, look at your own cosmogonies. Look at Egypt. And look at its basis as a source of science. Diop translated ancient theory into its native Wolof language. And he argued. And I have been able to see that most of what we learn in mathematics and science is easier in these our Bantu languages than we imagine. We've not just taken the pain to study it. And you can see in the news radio sometimes they were saying, can you teach science in African language? Diop has proved that it's translated into Wolof. Wolof is not so different from any Bantu languages. Okay, well, so I think I will stop here and try to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If we'd like to ask the first question, I'd like to include Alice as well into the discussion.
I have three questions, but perhaps I'll just ask two of them. The first one is Diop's, what I understand to be Diop's emphasis on a certain consciousness of your history in the doing of philosophy. And my question is, does history have only a conscious effect on us in doing philosophy? Can it not, even somebody who does not acknowledge his or her history in doing philosophy, not be said to be influenced by that history? My point being that Diop seems to speak as if one ought to acknowledge that consciously, that impact, for that person to be able to be said to be paying attention to his history. The second one is somewhat dubious. Maybe it's because I don't understand Diop very much. The emphasis on Egypt so that the implication is that we cannot speak of an African philosophy if, for instance, sufficient scientific evidence were to be found that Egypt isn't Africa. So if we were to find such evidence tomorrow, we could, if Diop were to be our assumptive truth, we would be able to disprove the existence of African philosophy. And the third one is the importance he puts on blackness as what he calls a scientific fact. Kwame Anthony Appiah speaks of recent evidence in population genetics that shows that race is not a scientific fact at all. So how does that factor into his thesis?
Yeah, thank you. You see, the concept of historical consciousness and philosophy is very important. Because how do you think? How do people think without a solid background? You have to have a consciousness of the self. Now, if you are thinking, look at how we think here in Africa. We bring in, that's why we have it. We just bring in a concept. Now we are learning we are learning Hegel, Kant. Kant is not abstract. Hegel is not abstract. Heidegger, you can learn from Heidegger. There are historical conditions, you understand, that necessitate thought, that will spur you to think. It's your historical situation. You just don't think. Philosophy dwells on the non-philosophical. You understand? It's the culture, the story. That's what, from there you think. So the beginning of Western philosophy is not anything. It's not that people just close their eyes and they start thinking of concern. It's from their historical material condition. You get what? You can see that in Hegel. You can see Kant. You can see that in Kant. You can see that especially in Heidegger. For one, it's the yes.
No, I just wanted to point out that Imam Chukwudeze, for instance, argues that Kant and Hegel and so on were not conscious of their historical assumptions they made when they argued, for instance, that Africans were inferior. So that is, again, that points to the unconsciousness of the effect of history, rather than that active consciousness of that effect on the part of the philosopher.
I think I might have read Emmanuel Chukwudeze wrong, because one thing is, at the same time, all of them were writing. What determined their view on Africans then was the slave trade. Well, the way they saw Africans during the slavery, then they went and proceeded. This is how they are, without an history. If you understand what I'm saying, so history is, and this is what, if you go to Otondi 2, history, if you go to Collingwood, McIntyre, history is very, very crucial to philosophy and to have an historical consciousness, because that's why we can say American philosophy, Indian philosophy. Everybody look at you are situated. You are not in space. You are situated in a historical context. I don't know if it's either who is saying this. Is it Roti or something? That's what we are already in history. We don't say, oh, when I will get there. No, we are already born into history and we are working. So that is very important. And again, Egypt and Africa. You get what? If what we need, we just need to know more to confirm the Africanness of Egypt. It can't be disproved. Look at the snakes. Look at the museum. Are we going to change it tomorrow? We just need further most knowledge. Though there is new advance in science that might actually allow us to trace. Say this is Egyptian pyramid, this is Nubian pyramid, this is Mapu Gugwe. Because one thing you people don't understand, you see Rose statue in Cape Town. You see the Great Zimbabwe. Yeah, you see the Rift Valley. You see the snakes. It's one line. It's a one straight line between that Rose Memorial, Great Zimbabwe, the Great Rift Valley, and the snakes. It's a one straight parallel line. You can see it in this woman wrote The Mystery of the White Lion. It's a white South African lady that wrote it, and it proves it scientifically. It's measured. This is a scientific fact. And again, Apia. Apia can hit in both ways. And he said in his father's house. Apia, the way Apia would think is, Apia is different. It's not Apia doesn't talk for Africans. Remember, Apia is at the peak of it. Apia his mother is Scottish, so his father's house can accommodate a lot. And even this old Afrocentric something, what Apia says is that actually he destroyed it. Even Ubuntu. Say, how can you come around and tell him, say, oh, imagine someone left Europe and say, hey, come brother, I've discovered the source of Egyptian, African, European philosophy, the thing. That's what Ubuntu is, the thing. So Apia has a different way of writing that it should be responded to differently. I'm not his fan.
No, but the evidence he quotes is not an Apia evidence. He quotes scientific evidence. Genetics.
There is no scientific theory of it that this is biologically different. But culturally, socially, we know there is race. There are black people. There are first people, and they have different life chances, and they have different histories. That is a fact.
Okay, we have two more questions with Chris.
Thank you. I just wanted to know what you thought of Mudimbe's criticism of you that you mentioned. I mean, if I'm right, he says that it's that he doesn't see any positive value to African philosophy after the colonial experience, and that there's no hope or positive value.
it's the same thing that everybody got on. Like Hegel says, look, before African were like, out of history, and the colonial situation it's like a descent to hell, and then post-colonial, then we now come to the New Jerusalem. Is these three stages of construction of African history that which I do not agree with. You get what I'm because instead to challenge Hegel, and it's like if I have to challenge Hegel, I can't be talking in the other way without being mad. It's like this conceptual, causing a conceptual double bind. If I want to respond to Hegel, I have to respond in a language or in a term Hegel himself will understand. I can't just respond to Hegel and then start talking the other way. I have to take him on his own term and then from his own point of view, but then break it down to show him, based on his own term, where and how he is strong, then I can start a new way, rather than me just leaving Hegel and going to talk, not confront him. That I think is what it means.
Okay, sure. I understand that, but I just wonder, is there not something, apart from the Hegelian, whether he becomes Hegelian, is there something to be said for African philosophy after colonialism? Is that just ethno-philosophy? I mean, why do we need to go back to Egypt? What is it corrupted, or completely corrupted? Do you think that's right?
You see, African philosophy.
Diops thinks that.
The mistake people make is that we're not going where we are going to Egypt is because we want to go into modernity. That is the easiest way for us to go. Because if we start going, we are taking modernity a historical hub. Meanwhile, we can get into modernity by just studying our language, connecting it to the roots of modernity, and then it's easier than taking it in a very non-historical way. But what the prove is that we are not alien to science. You understand? Through our cosmogony and connection to Egypt, we know if you just have to study our own language and our own cosmogony, relate it, understand it differs from Egypt. We go to modernity straight, rather than saying we never had no connection with modernity and trying to import it from a very high, unconnected level.
So, can I? Sorry, this other question.
10 more minutes. So I think there was another question outside.
Okay, I would like to ask your thoughts on what Mudimbe, Bezuma Yemba and his reconstructionist scholars are saying in terms of the tools that African philosophy is using. The comment that Diop says that young African philosophers should be able to adapt scientific attitude towards philosophy, but it should be fully or purely philosophy in the context in which we understand philosophies from the West and all over. And the fact that it's too tainted with a lot of myths and that are not clear in terms of systematic articulation of African philosophy. So I would want to know your thoughts on the state of African philosophy under the light of this criticism that has been coming of late.
I can't know everything. But my own point is this, you see, I understand Mudimbe very well. And I don't know, I even something. Mudimbe has a different audience. And this is one thing you find in Utonji. Mudimbe is not talking to us. Mudimbe is talking to people who can understand. Because one thing is this. What Diop is saying is, look, we can't run away from ourselves. We can't just come around and say we grow up today. Ethno-philosophy is important because it's historical. It's what we find. It is so for us to now stand and say we not just get into modernity and start discussing on the level, we won't get anywhere. We have to say because that's why colonialism, we never leave our culture. That's why we speak other languages. We are a double world view. So to now say we should just spring around and get into modern and say all these things that is our historical past we live is nothing, and then go moving on. We can't go. That is wrong for me. So for me, what I think Diop is proving is that we is not out of science. You understand? I think I answered that. That for us to actually get into science is to try to understand this our myth. You understand? What is go and read Plato, even Diop called the father of myths, Plato and Socrates. They have more myths than anybody. So it's just actually trying to understand, because myth is not just wide construction. It is the means of explanation. It is our role now to go around and try to understand the importance of this myth. And Diop said the only way for us to get a classical knowledge of it is comparing it to Egypt. Because this is where everything started. Started for the Europeans, started for Africans. This is the root of it.
Okay. another question here.
I'm asking a question as a complete outsider because I don't know Diops at all. But I'm trying to see the similarities between the discipline, what's happening in philosophy and what has happened in psychology, which is that this idea that science is not ideological, the idea that science is neutral, is one that particularly feminists have argued against.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we start, talking, for example, the post-colonial feminists would say, we can't talk about feminism, we have to talk about feminisms, because it really depends on where you are in the world. The politics of location, in other words, plays a very big role. I think what you've been saying here today, for me, talks to the indivisibility of power and knowledge. What we take to be true depends on, so if we take that point, then surely a question like, to me it's such a binary question. Does it exist or doesn't it exist? And does it have legitimacy? Doesn't it have legitimacy? Is it African or not African? To me, that's not a very, I don't understand the utility of that question, because I don't know whether it can be resolved. I don't know if it can be resolved. Possibly the kinds of questions then have to be around what is the use that these arguments are put to? Why are we trying to establish this legitimacy? What is the purpose of doing that? Because as you've pointed out, the history and the connectedness of the world, it's pretty obvious that everything is connected and that everyone is, influenced by their history. So, my question to you is, do you think this can be resolved? Is this question, does an African philosophy exist? Is it one isn't it one that's always going to be contested? And so maybe, because to me, it's obvious that it does exist. So, why are we still asking the question?
Thank you very much. You see, I don't know more about psychology, but I think for you to understand Diops and psychology, to look at fraud and Egypt.
Okay.
You get fraud as, fraud is deep into Egypt, actually. Fraud is deep into African cosmology, too. You get what I mean? So you look at that in trying to understand fraud and Egypt. And again, say this question will not be resolved. And you know why this question is important? Because an African philosophy, it's not that is there an African philosophy. What constitutes it? Do we start from just Bantu philosophy and start talking about African philosophy? When we have a deeper history, Egypt is here. Egypt informed Greece. Greece doesn't. Why is important? If it's not valid knowledge, look at all over this continent. There is no department of Egyptology. But go to Europe. Go to European university. They have dedicated Egyptology. What are they learning? What is the base of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment? It's Egypt. So for us to, if we really want to have actually a new balance, especially when this thing is just, what is you? It is what you can relate. You can walk from here and try to trace it, even if the wind is blowing it. You can, and the moment people realize that, look, they are not, for everywhere should forgive me. Why do you think people of European, why do you think they are very, very assertive and confident? Because if I were to take my kid now and I walk him on the street, you see things that say, that Statue of Liberty, we made it. Look at computer, we made it. So it takes it as stride. It doesn't try to say, oh, I'm amazed by it. You can even kids, if you see most of our kids here, before they are 5, 6, they can write. Before they are 3 years old, they know how to hold the pen. They unconsciously learn, they have the ability, but some kids who never see his father hold a pen, you find imagine. You get one. So the consciousness, that historical consciousness is very important as a psychologist, Without the knowledge of the self, and that's what to know thyself. If you don't know yourself, you can't do anything. You get what? Then you have a schizophrenic personality, you are confused. But having a valid knowledge, true knowledge of yourself, and again, philosophy is never ending. It's always a process. So that is why we say we continue questioning what we know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We have to finish now because it's time and there's another meeting. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dr. Morakinyo.
Oh, finish it. Thank you.